Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Ethereal Archives with our podcast, Lost in the Ether. Today, you've got me, Spence, alongside with my friend Eric, and
Hello.
today we're going to be going through uh, just basically a thought exercise of what if we had all the power in creation and we wanted to make our own perfect game, what would that actually look like? So I'm going to let Eric go ahead and start with what his dream perfect game is, etc. And then we'll move on to me. And then that should be it for the video. I don't think we have anything else that we need to go over. No updates or anything. So we should be fine.
Mhm.
And I'll just let Eric get started.
Okay. Thanks, Spence. All right, so I'm pretty much the simulator person and all that, so in any tycoon-based game. So I thought it would be really interesting and different if there was a management type tycoon style game for like a racetrack management game, where you pretty much would manage the different contracts, the different series that would come through your track, and manage the renovations and manage the upkeep and any design, um, and then any sales and income from those events would go back into the racetrack, and then you can improve it and then work your way up and unlock more series as the track gets popular and more popular.
So kind of like
And then
those old
fans as
school
well.
Kind of like those old school roller coaster games.
Yeah, yeah, like that. Yeah, I mean, it'd be like a somewhere it's like where it's kind of like where you would have different series where they would be um, unlocked over time, where you would start with like a really small series that's maybe not well known, but it drives some fans in, some um, viewership in, and you could start getting some income through there, and then you start unlocking the more higher tier series like like
You still with me?
oh, still here. Sorry.
You cut out, Eric.
Oh, it drop out on me. Am I
Yeah,
still there?
yeah, you're here now.
Okay.
So
Okay.
you were just explaining, like I think you just ended on all right. So it would start out with low tier stuff, and then the more you made, the more you earned, the more you unlocked, and then that's when you cut out.
Yeah, yeah, pretty much. It's like you would go through the whole thing and pretty much have your higher tier series that you would unlock over time, and then you'd slowly get up to the NASCAR and all those prestigious series, and where you'd be raking in more, and all the fans would come in and allow you to then rebuild. But the only caveat, the only problem with that whole game is you would have to kind of speed up the kind of the game clock, so to speak, since most of those tracks only have maybe one or two, um, high profile series every year. So you would have to kind of figure out a way to supplement that income with maybe some entertainment or some other racing sports and stuff that would maybe want to, rent the track or something for another event or some sort
Well,
of, concert series. So,
I
it's
think
just,
that's one way, but I think another angle of attack you could do on this would be something like, okay, so say that we want this thing to be a simulator, right? But say we take it more as an individual simulator, so you're trying to build up your track and everything, but you have the actual gameplay of you racing in it as well. So, for
hmm
instance, the track itself could hire a racer and then you play as that racer or something like that. But then you have objectives
yeah,
and everything where you host races and you try to beat him. So the first, in my head, I'm thinking a way of attack of going about this is like you have some crappy backyard racetrack in the middle of nowhere that you
hmm
buy or that you built,
Yeah.
that's like a dirt road, and then you start off with small races of like rednecks and all that kind of stuff, if that makes sense.
Right.
So
Yeah,
like
yeah.
so like you dirt biking, all that kind of stuff, and then you slowly, as the races go on, you slowly build profits, you build fans, and the more fans you get, the more income you get, then you can upgrade to like a solid road and then race something more
Mhm.
specific like cars on it. But here's the
Right.
thing, like you're also in there racing with them. So like every race or something, you will get the results of the decisions that you made beforehand. So that could be how like it'd almost be like a turn base, but the turn base is the game itself or the race
Mhm.
itself. So I think
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's yeah.
you can have the time management aspect, but I think you could also have the you as an individual making decisions and making the racetrack better as a whole from your own
Mhm.
actions.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, I mean that's a good point. And you just build it up over time. I mean, I did think of it where maybe it'd be cool to maybe own a team or have something where you maybe would like to, um kind of I don't know, kind of trade places with certain people on the team and have different responsibilities, kind of, I don't know. It would be a very, very different game than anything out there, but with, once your road's paved and once you have it depends on what type of racetrack you want. You want to have a road course, you want to have an oval, and then it depends on, what your design, it depends on what type of series and everything you unlock. And obviously none of the big series are going to take you really seriously if you are on like some dirt track. It would have to be paved and well thought out, and then you can unlock that. But
Well, that
anyway,
could
so
be like
that's
in-game content, supposedly, quote unquote. Because
yeah.
if you really take the idea of building your own track or own stadium track seriously,
Hmm.
then what you could do is have multiple different genres of racing. So we already mentioned dirt bikes and all that kind of stuff, but you can actually have in the early game something like dog racing. You could have something like horseback riding. So like while you're trying to build up things for the course itself, you could have multiple areas of
Hmm.
racing happening at the same time. So you could have like I guess what I'm trying to get at is like the ultimate end goal of the game might a good plan of attack might be to actually have it be the ultimate racetrack for every kind of racing.
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
obviously from like a gameplay development standpoint, I'm not sure that would be able something that we could pull off that you would be able to
Yeah, I
pull
mean
off.
it's
But infinite
yeah.
resources, that might be the perfect race game right there is that you start from nothing with all the basic forms of racing and then slowly over time you get to design your own grand stadium of all racing.
Hmm. Yeah, just it would be a yeah, it would be interesting because you would have to have a I mean, you would have to have a one main track, and then inside the infield, for instance, you could have a drag race. You could have a drag strip if you wanted. Like, I mean, I'm not into drag, but drag racing, but it's one of those things where but anyway, so that was my kind of idea where I thought of it a long time ago. Um there's like, I mean, there's games out there where you can manage a race team and go to track to track to track, but there's not a race, or not a race. There's not a game where you could just, build a venue and then slowly upgrade that over time and, unlock more prestigious
Yeah, because you're
series.
talking
And
sort of like a settlement system almost to
yeah, yeah,
racing.
kind of like that, because a lot of these series are built over a 4-day stretch. NASCAR's at one track for 4 days. The road course thing, that's the same way. They get there maybe Wednesday, Tuesday, the haulers come. You got to find a way to, they have to park the big rig somewhere, so you have that, and then you have to go and make sure all the teams are have all their, they get a set of, they get a certain number of tires for the weekend that they have to, everything. I mean, you could brainstorm this, you know, for months and months and months trying to come up with everything that you would possibly think. But
Well, that's sort of the
um,
point, though, because so like if we had infinite resources and wanted to design this game properly, I would say what we could do is set up two different settlement systems. So, for instance, like you could design the racetrack itself, because like
mhm.
I don't know if you ever played the old school like motocross games, but like you could build your own dirt bike
Yeah,
tracks.
yeah, I yeah, I think I did. I'm not sure which, not sure what I played back then.
But like you know what
I
I'm
don't,
talking about, where you can like go
ye-
in and you have a certain plot area based upon. We can make it based upon your tier. So like tier one is just very small basic plot area that you only
mhm,
have limited options with. But the more you expand the stadium, the more
yeah,
room you have to actually do all crazy kinds of racing stuff for entertainment of
right,
the audience
right,
supposedly. And
right. And if you, right, right,
but you could
and
also have a separate system for the commercial aspect. So you have the stadium itself, but like you can design
mhm,
the stadium in the sense of art. So do I want these kinds of stands? Do I want this kind of seating? Do I want
mhm,
X, Y, and Z? And that,
yeah,
and we could. I don't know if this works for you, but like other than aesthetics, what we could do is put in more statistical data on which kind of seatings attracts the most kind of people, or what kind of seatings attract which kind of audience you
mhm,
want, and just make it very specific. Like say if like we had somebody who only liked motorcycle racing.
mhm,
We can make seating in stadiums. Hopefully, we obviously infinite resources. We can customize the seatings with color and all that kind of stuff so that they can design it how they want. But maybe certain kind of seatings only work for certain kind of audiences. So you have like a
mhm,
general
right,
seating that can attract everybody, but then you have very specific kinds of seatings that only attract these X amount of audience members for X amount of sport. And then you can just specialize your stadium for that particular thing. And then people can have multiple games or playthroughs for specific stadiums.
right, right. And you would have to then build, I would think, some sort of you know, intelligent engine, so to speak, where, the system would have to know, okay, you chose that stadium package or grandstand type design. It will then know based on what your choices are, you know, what you can kind of, cater to. So, kind of like a customization engine where it would just detect what would be allowed to be there.
Yeah, I think that's a really good angle of attack. Because then what you could do also is on the commercial aspect, you could have that whole time passing thing like you were originally wanting. So like the racing itself, you
Hmm.
can participate in, but the commercial aspect, that's all based upon turn based or time based stuff. So
Right,
you can have the time
right, and
management of the settlement with that while also enjoying the actual racing.
right, and that was the big challenge for me when I first started thinking. I'm like, well, you think of Daytona, it's like, well, NASCAR goes there in what this was it the spring or yeah, spring, and then they go there in the fall, and it's like, yeah, but what happens in between? Like, what can you do? And I'm like, well, think about all these, all these what is it? Festivals, like music festivals, all these different places. They need venues to attract their fans. They need a place to, you know, to show off whoever they're, presenting. It's like you can do that in the middle of, between those two races to just satisfy income and just bring in more different series. So, anyways, but I thought that was a very unique idea for a game. And there isn't one because I know. I've
Yes, if
looked
there's
at them
anybody
all, and
who knows
you know,
about that, it would be you. Because Lord
yeah.
knows I don't look into this stuff.
I mean, there are a few that are close. I mean, the closest one I can see is Motorsport Manager, but that only, hence the name, it only is for the actual management of a motorsport team. You go to all these different things, but it's none of them are actually, from the perspective of actually owning a you know a piece of land and a venue. So I mean, but yeah, so that was kind of what I was thinking. I mean, I would like to also it'd be nice to kind of add in some crafting type elements and stuff. I don't know what I would think I want it top down, where it's just you're looking at it from the, that type. It's
Well,
just
you can
since it would be
definitely
that
have
type of
it be
style.
when you're creating and redesigning the stadium, it could be a top down, or at least have the option for that.
Mm-hmm.
As far as crafting goes, well, maybe
Yeah.
that's you satisfy that niche with the actual cars themselves. So, like in early tier, you are only access to a few basic car models and engines and all that kind
Mm-hmm.
of stuff. And then, obviously, infinite resources. We could customize it with different paint jobs and
Mm-hmm.
everything. But like maybe the crafting
Yeah.
would be more on the individual racing side rather than the stadium side. Because the stadium side I still see as like the management system. So if we could transfer the
Right.
crafting into like, okay, you have your outside of the car slash you also have the engine of the car slash you have the interior of the car of which you could actually see if you went to first person because obviously you need both third and first
Right.
person options for people. There's no exception to that rule because people
Mm-hmm.
have their preference on how they like to race, and knowing you like racing simulators a lot, so having the first person view is required in a lot of racing
Yeah.
things. So I would just say that's one way of going about it is aesthetic crafting, but also the actual hardcore, and you can develop these skills as like quote unquote a racing team or a racing character, and
Mm-hmm.
they can have it where like you're specced out to, or you have the experience to craft whatever you want on the car, but it comes from actually trying to craft things for the car. So each race is unique in the sense that you're crafting something new for each race, but also each craft is useful to the next one, hopefully.
Right, and each series is different. You have a truck series where they're all trucks, and then you have a Xfinity where they're stock cars, but they're a little bit more like sports cars, and you have NASCAR where they're a little bit more factory styled you know cars and things like that. So, but it would be nice if you're racing and let's say a failure happens on the car and something breaks down in the middle of a race, and let's say it's a 4 hour race, like an endurance race. You could go back in the shop and then kind of switch into one of the mechanics and find the problem and fix it, where it would just the game would guide you through finding the part and then getting it rebuilt and then literally getting back out on the track as soon as possible without going down too many laps. But it's one of those things that I would like to. It's like a smorgasbord of all these different avenues in one game, but there hasn't been one out there like that. And I'm like, it'd be pretty cool if there was a game like this where you could do this and do that, because it'd just be kind of cool to have that management and crafting side. I like both of them, but I also like that sim side as well. So it's like the best of all three. But yeah, so that is my idea.
Okay. Well, I think
Yeah,
honestly, like if a developer was listening to us, I think that's a lot to
yeah,
brainstorm over off of that alone. But I
yeah.
would even say another thing to consider with the game design on this is that you could have two modes of play. You can have realistic play, and then you can also have quick match play. So
Yep.
realistic, obviously, is what you do for Race Simulator as it is. And for
Hmm.
people who don't know that, it's like legit, like you're trying to replicate the NASCAR experience of being a driver, which is the long, crap long race of left turns. I know Eric's going to hate me for saying that, but it's it's
I
an
mean, it's
actual
a long
like
race.
yeah, but like it's an actual long race, and I think that's how the settlement system during realistic mode would actually work well with that because after each race, there's time that passed where you can measure progress of
Hmm.
your entire stadium. But with quick play, it would be more of just like, okay, so you have 3 laps. Who's the biggest winner? What's the biggest wins? And you can have it switched to the settlement system of it being after matches, where you get your results of the decisions you make, and each match is like a turn. So
Hmm.
that's how that would work. And
Yeah, yeah.
because you also have to consider like you need to make this game for more than just people who are share the same perspective as you. You need to make this game for like
Oh,
anybody
yeah.
who can sit down and
Oh,
play
for
it.
sure.
So
Yeah, and that's yeah, yeah.
but I think like what we've already gone over is actually a pretty dope racing game if we could actually make that happen. Because
Yeah, it'd be a lot, but I
well,
mean,
it would be
it's
time. So like if we, let's say hypothetically that if we actually got a game studio started up from all the stuff that we're trying to do, and we had the time to actually sit down and do it, this is more of making sure that we got all the mechanics right than it is anything else. Because graphics, as much as people love graphics, they're not as required as people assume
yeah, no,
with gameplay. It's more of like if you can make a game with simple graphics but everything's stylized, that's going to be just as good as a game with realistic
hmm
graphics and the smallest detail and dent on a car. It's like
yeah,
great. How's the actual gameplay? That's the question people need to ask. And I
yeah,
think that how you're approaching your racing game is actually probably going to be the best way of going about that because you get the best of all worlds of I get to race how I like.
hmm
I get to race what I like. I would assume, and my personal thing, I would assume that the first game would just be devoted to motor racing. So,
hmm
like car racing and maybe bike racing. Don't do anything more than that as like a first installment if we were to actually do this. Because I don't know if I said this before, but like first games, all they have to do is sell the concept of the franchise. They don't actually have to be the best version of that concept.
yeah,
So with the first
right,
game,
right,
you would just have to make sure to get the settlement stadium system down along with the individual racing aspects with the character or the team skills for the cars and the crafting
hmm
of the cars
hmm
and then just have the racing mechanics work out any kinks that are potential so that it's fun both for the realistic racing but also for the quick matching. And that would be the most I think that would be the most realistic way of going about it because that solves all the problems of what you might run into as introducing the franchise. And then all you have to do is just sell it as, hey guys, here's probably the best racing game you're going to play anytime soon. So boom.
yeah, yeah, and I think that's the biggest thing is but you also sell it as that management style as well, like you were saying, because you can't just. I don't want to just sell it as a racing game because if I do that, I feel like it's gonna come back, and there's so many other racing type games out there like simulators and stuff, and it's just like you need something to kind of first get them in and get them hooked, and I feel like that a management style with with the track like that would be a nice way to introduce it, and then kind of say, oh, by the way, here's another thing we have, and then say what's coming
Well, I
next,
mean,
but
if I
kind of,
had to design
you know,
the ad campaign for that, I would go on three modes of attack. So the first attack I would be is just like this is an awesome racing game that you can play with your friends, etc. But also like this is a game you can devote hours into it and really personalize this stadium that you can also share with friends
hmm
because obviously we would want people to share each other's stadiums with each other. Sort
right.
of I don't know how we would implement that offhand, but I would say something like a archive for like, all right, here's my
hmm
stadium, or we can have people have tournaments with each other's stadiums or something like that, so that they can actually share their hard work with each other, almost like a Animal Crossing kind of deal, because they can share their worlds with each other, and then other players can come in and explore the worlds that they've been working on for so long. I think that would be
hmm
probably the best way of doing it because having thinking of it like an archive, like with Sims 4, I don't think would work with something like this, and that's mainly because you know no one's going to download their settlement when they already have their own that they're working on. What they want is just to experience somebody else's
Right.
settlement for a short time. That's what it really is.
Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah. I think if it just kind of stays to where maybe you'd want to show off and maybe add it to the um, community where someone could explore it. But other than that, kind of keep it original to the person where it's just not that way you don't duplicate it or whatever. It would be nice, but obviously, um, you know, just the original idea would be nice just to start off and then oh by the way, yeah, you can, choose the team or whatever and race. So that'd be nice. But yeah, it would be a big game, but then, it would be a lot of different missions and a lot of different roles inside that game that you can actually try out. So, but yeah, that's pretty much the big one that I had. I mean, I could say space game. I could, I could go on and on, but
Knowing you,
you
space
know,
games, yes, we could definitely
I
have a
mean,
conversation about that.
yeah,
But
there's so many games that like for space that it's kind of been a saturated field, and I want to be original with the idea. I don't want to be like another something. It's like, oh yeah, this reminds me of this. This is totally this. So,
well, I mean,
but
I
anyways,
I understand where you're coming from on that one, but we also have to remember there's nothing new under the sun either. So
no,
people are going to draw
but
similarities with everything.
right, but that's what's also interesting as well with the getting back to like the graphics part is you don't want those graphics to be too high end because your audience, you want to be able to actually run the game on a somewhat decent computer, and stylized graphics wouldn't be that bad. So it's
Yeah,
not
well,
like if it was
let's just
very
take
very
something
deep
like
textures.
ESO compared to just using Bethesda as an example. Let's take something like ESO compared to Fallout 76. Fallout 76 is a lot more graphic intensive than ESO, but yet ESO has
Hmm.
larger, well, obviously mistakes of 76 aside, but ESO had the same mistakes when it first started out. And I think the reason why ESO has such more grasp for an audience is that it's not really that demanding for graphics. It's just, okay, here's the design of the armor, here's the shape of it, and here's
Hmm.
the stylized version of it. It's not in depth, it's just neat and nice and it looks good.
Hmm.
This just by the aesthetic of it. So I definitely agree that having cars that are far more stylized than graphically intense is going to be the best way to go on that for everybody. And then that'll also translate into consoles fairly easily as well. And
Right.
because I'm also thinking like a lot of this conversation has reminded me of like the old school Tony Hawk games, like
Hmm.
Tony Hawk
Yeah.
Underground,
Yeah. Yeah.
that, and Tony Hawk American Wasteland. Because
Yeah. Where you would build your own parks.
yeah, so that's what this conversation is really reminded me of. And you were able, that was such a nice balance between all the different aspects of both skating and park building, even though they were separate. This game we would actually include it together as one as the actual point of the game.
Yeah, but couldn't you actually skate in those games on your own
You
park?
could, but it wasn't the park of the main story.
Oh,
Yeah, so
interesting.
like if you took American Wasteland, you would accomplish
Uh-huh.
quests to improve that park, but the park was already pre-made. You just removed junk essentially. Whereas in the creative mode, you could create anything, even like get rid of like bury into the dirt or raise the dirt even, so you can have more of a skating opportunity. But that was never part of the main story.
Interesting.
So it's one of those things where like the reason why I like your idea is because we can actually get the main story with the creative mode together, and that's the actual point of the game. To
Mm.
have the racing and the stadium building be the same thing.
Yeah, and I think that's where it's a game changer because it's just you get I know at least with the audience that I have on Twitch and just the guys that I have, I know a lot of people would be interested in a game like this, um and I'm good friends with an actual professional race car driver as well. So you start getting people kind
You
of getting
should
the
start
word
your
out.
own podcast then and talk to them about it.
Well, he's got enough on his plate. He's a
True
professional NASCAR
enough,
driver.
but
But anyways, no,
there's
I've
no
been on
name
his channel
dropping
a long
here.
time. If I need to, I can call him out.
I
It's Anthony
don't worry
Alfredo.
about it. This is not the point of our channel.
Okay.
You should though.
Oh,
You
well,
should.
mine would be a token of sports, and
Yeah. If
there'd
you
be a
already know one, talk
lot
to him. Just like have see if he's free for like an actual conversation, like a good hour of his time. That's not a bad idea. But
no, I don't know. Yeah. But anyways, but that was my game, so I thought it was unique. I mean, I have to be honest, I didn't know how you'd take it. I thought you'd poo-poo
Well, I
part of
mean,
it.
Eric,
Uh,
I mean, I know I give you a lot of crap sometimes for your taste in games, but at the heart of it, like, I know you have your enjoyment, and that's exactly what you should be doing, isn't playing games you enjoy. Even though I don't understand it, God, I
yeah.
don't understand it, but, you know,
But it's different, you know? It's just like
yeah.
I don't want to go and just, shoot zombies all day and this and that. It's like
Why do you
and
not want to do that all the time?
I
Anyway,
just don't want to. It just does like
that's
I'd
fine.
rather
That's
be,
fine.
putting my I mean, because that's the thing with um with settlement building and stuff. I mean, you have a goal, you have something you're trying to do. It's the
Is
same
not
thing with
blowing
sim
brains out of zombies a goal for you? I thought
not
all gamers
not
were on the same
really.
page with this. Like,
No. I mean, not for me right now. I mean, I like to have goals where I'm like, you know,
would you play a zombie
building
game if the
something.
point of the game was base defense and base building?
That's 7 days to die.
Yes, exactly. But imagine it actually being good and fun to play.
And not being glitched out in Minecraft like.
Actually,
Yeah.
even
That
Minecraft
it
having a
would
better
it would
survival
be an
mode would be a lot
interesting.
more fun. But anyway, but no, like Eric,
Anyways.
but like because here's the thing, like even though that's not really my genre of games, like what we just talked about with yours, that actually catches my interest because that actually sounds like if it was done correctly, would be lots of fun for a lot of people, including myself.
Right, and it would interest a lot of different different types of gamers, and then it may get them introduced into a different type of style of of gaming that they've never really, thought they'd like racing, for instance. You never know.
Yeah, because like
So I don't know.
even though I don't
So
care for racing games, it's one of those things where like, well, maybe the whole economic system about it, maybe the whole, competing, and maybe we should have talked about that sooner. But in my head, I was thinking that you can even have stadium teams that compete against each other and just have AI matches that way too. And then just see if you can build the best
yeah,
AI
I
team.
yeah, I don't. Yeah, yeah. I mean, you could get to a point where you could have like a leaderboard of like who can create the most iconic track with the most like the craziest type of events and the most lucrative and you know money driven you know income stream. I don't know, you can like remix it in several ways. It's like Cities and Skylines is a really good, it's a really well built out game, but I would like to do certain things with it. I would like to, where you could, okay, you place a racetrack here, you place a football stadium. Okay, I'd like to actually, you know,
Yeah.
go in depth in that stadium and do stuff. And you just place there. It's like, well, that's like any other, you know, Sim City or anything. So, um, I don't know. It's just it's like a whole different way of looking at a tycoon game where you can kind of just peel back the layers of what you placed on the track and then go first person into certain places and become um like take on the role of the mechanic, take on the role of
Well,
whatever.
that could be something that you do with a different kind of. So let's say if like we wanted to build our own Sims game, that would be something that we could do where we could place the stadium inside of the game after we built it in the other game. But I don't want. I think it's a bad idea to
Hmm.
do too much. Like there is such a thing as too much freedom in a game. There is such a thing as
Right,
that.
right, and
So,
that's yeah, and I don't want to do too much to where it's like
but
too
if you could,
crazy and
but if you could narrow that focus and then have a game that integrates all the other games as the whole concept, like so, like say if we did something like City and Skylines, but
hmm
what you could do is that when you built your city, you could connect all those different aspects. So like the racetrack would be connected to your actual racetrack game, so that when you say, okay, I want to play this, you can actually spawn and launch the other game and get into that maybe seamlessly. I doubt
hmm
that was even a possibility with hardware, but Just something like that. Or like
Yeah.
if we had like a football game with the same esque as the racing game that we just talked about, and you place that in your
Hmm.
world, like just there are ways of integrating that, but I wouldn't make that all the same
Hmm.
game. There's way Unfortunately, as much as people say we want choice in gaming, the reality is that you don't want too much choice. What you want is your specific choices with the genre that you're
Right.
playing in.
Right.
So when I play, it's sort of the problem of what happened with a lot of zombie games is that they try to be too much at the same time instead of just focusing on,
Hmm.
okay, well, people are playing this to kill zombies. Let's make sure that part works
Hmm.
well first, and then we can start working on other things as well because they couldn't even get that right. But
Hmm.
with let's say like if we wanted to actually implement something like that, I would imagine being focusing on a game at a time and then making that final game integrate all those guys together would be the best option.
Right. Right. I mean, I think maybe like something where it's like, I don't want to say a DLC because the DLC just adds into that
Yeah, I just
gameplay, but
cringed
like
when you said
something
that
where,
to me.
yeah. So it, I understand what you're saying. Like, I would like it to be separate, but have them like connected where the actual, um, like the servers could be connected where you could actually, pull your stuff out, like where you can actually export your, um, or not export, you could just sign into an account or whatever, and then just add your whatever saved, um,
Yeah,
you know, what is it, racetracks or venues or whatever into there. So,
because they
yeah, it's
should
just,
because they
yeah.
should have a digital outline that you can place into your world.
Mm-hmm.
So that should work, in my opinion. That should be more seamless than anything. I don't imagine having a problem with that. And then
Right.
it would just be like we would have to make sure to build all that kind of stuff, those games first, and then that final game for the cities and skyline as kind of deal. That would be the final game in all of that. And then the next gen would be
Mm-hmm.
redoing all of it, just making each game better than the last one. So,
Right. Right, but we would be starting with the main base game of like the tycoon based, right? That's what you're saying? That's what
yeah,
you're thinking?
yeah, it would just be
Okay.
each genre of game first, and then you would have the Sim City situation.
Oh, okay.
That's what I'm saying. Like I'm just
Okay.
saying like let's make sure you build all the genres you want first that you can build and before you make the actual city simulator.
Oh, yeah, yeah, no, no. I mean, I don't actually create an actual city. I'm just saying like the actual track. I'm just saying like just the main.
Oh, okay. That's
Yeah.
fine.
No, 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 no. Yeah, I'm okay. I'm taking part of SimCities like or Cities and Skylines the way they're top down, the the way the game is designed navigation wise and stuff. That's what I'm saying. I'm taking parts of their the characteristics of the navigation, how you can move from one part to another and place different objects. That's what I'm saying. I don't want another city type game. I just want one specific thing to focus on, like the venue.
Right. That's
So,
fine.
anyways, yeah. So yeah, but I'm finished with that. That's my idea. So
Well, Eric, I think that's a really good way of going about it. Hopefully, someone actually takes that idea and rolls with it. Though, personally, I think we should be the ones doing it. But no, I
yeah,
think I think
yeah.
I
Start
like
out
that
little
idea.
and then grow it.
Yeah, I do like that idea, though. I think
Yeah.
that's a good angle of attack.
And I think it would be nice just to start small. Just to start simple with a very simple. You give them the concept of the game, like you know, you build part of it where it's like, hey, it's still in early access, whatever. You and give them part of that. You give them a little taste of, okay, this is the overall concept. Here it is, and then as the more growth, you know, um, it has, and the more players, join in and actually like adopt it and use it, you know, you can add on. But, just being very simple with it and just getting the main concept, um, driven home is the most important thing of just getting that very simple idea. But, here it is in a nutshell early on, kind of already, um, provided to them in a very cookie cutter type, just simple
Yeah.
management style first. So, anyways,
Well, good.
yeah. All right, so you are up.
All right. Um, so, as we talked about in our last podcast, I love RPGs. I love that idea of gaming because for me as an individual, what I'm missing from my life is more adventure than anything else. So I love
Mm-hmm.
RPGs because I get to experience a lot of different things without having to worry about real life problems. Because
Mm-hmm.
exploring through different worlds, lore, all that kind of stuff, it's just a natural inclination for me. And for my perfect game, if I had infinite resources, I would probably craft a game in that has three major aspects to it. So the first one I'm working on this now as an individual. So I don't know if I mentioned this before, but I'm currently working on my own book novel series. I'm currently writing the first book right now.
Mm-hmm.
And the hopes of that book is to actually sort of propel this very idea that I'm going to be talking about, which is this idea of a long, continuous franchise where every single game you're
Mm-hmm.
learning something brand new about the world that you're basically playing in. And a lot of
Mm-hmm.
that, because like a lot of things that we've gotten to a point with things like Bethesda and Fallout, it's sort of gotten to a point where everything seems like we're playing the same thing over and over again now. And that's not bad in a way, but it's also like, well, we always have the same factions. Like the
Mm-hmm.
Brotherhood of Steel is always in there. All right. The Enclave was in the majority of the games up until Fallout 4. So, in which case they were just replaced by the Institute, which is a version of the same thing, just with science instead of the US. And then with Elder Scrolls, it's like, all right, well, obviously it's going to be centered around a province that we've probably already explored because they still don't want to explore things like Black Marsh or elsewhere yet. I mean, we're touching on that with ESO and all that kind of stuff, but like it's just one of those things where like I feel like having a whole world that each game you can have a solid installment with it, with a new country, with new problems, with new situations. That's what I would love from RPGs as a franchise. But my personal perfect game would be something as akin to an RPG that is very fleshed out with single player, that's very fleshed out with its quest line, very fleshed out with its characters, extremely well written with its quest design in the sense that we're just like with Fallout New Vegas, every single quest you could end in about 3 to 4 ways. That's why Fallout New Vegas has such replayability because they actually designed the quest to have multiple endings every single quest. So that's
And yeah,
no go for it.
okay. But if I'm understanding, I'm not huge into Fallout history, but Fallout New Vegas was the best out of any of them, correct?
Objectively
That's
speaking, yes, there were some problems with it, and it's still not a perfect game. Obviously, it's Bethesda after all we're talking about here, and Obsidian by extension, who also is not a perfect game designer. But
Mhm.
objectively speaking, Fallout New Vegas is the standard for Fallout games because it was so good at what it was trying to do. So like you can play Fallout New Vegas multiple playthroughs and still be finding new stuff and new ways of playing the game. And a lot of that had to do with its just basic design of we have a multitude of perks which lead to a multitude of reactions which leads to a multitude of dialogues and ending of resolutions. So like every single thing that they did compounded onto each other and then they compounded even more onto that. So there's a lot of replayability and that's what people like about Fallout New Vegas. But also Fallout New Vegas is just very interesting as a whole. So like you have the Legion, you have New California Republic, and they're not black and white factions. Like there's a lot of problems with both of them, and you've got to make the
Mm.
even though it's pretty self evident which guys are the bad guys, you've got to make decisions in that game that even make the good guys seem like, is this really worth fighting for?
Yeah, but that's what's nice about a game like that. It's different, and it really makes you. It's more realistic too. You're
And
having to kind of,
but let's
question your ethics too.
you're right, but then let's offset that with Fallout 4, which is arguably one of the weakest in the franchise since Bethesda bought it. And that Fallout 4, you have four main factions, all of which are kind of watered down, so there's not really much complexity to it. And then on top of that, three of the factions you can argue are good guys, even though really only one of the factions is a good guy, and they're the most boring and repetitive faction out of all of them. I'm referring to the Minutemen, by the way. So the Minutemen and Preston
Hmm.
Garvey, they are the definition of good guys, flat out. They're the most moral faction in the Wasteland, and legit, there's almost nothing wrong with them, which is unfortunate because even in their own past in the game lore, like there was infighting, there was battles that they've lost, like that. It
Hmm.
it just seems like there wasn't much complexity to even that, and that's the best faction in the game as far as like what's best for the Commonwealth kind of decision. But then you have guys like the Brotherhood of Steel who are just like, they're obviously they're the military badasses, but also at the same point it's just like, okay, it's another fetch quest. Okay, oh wait, we're done with the game. Oh my, like legit, like I think it's like only two wipeout quests, three fetch quests, and that's the majority of the Brotherhood of Steel quest line. And there's not much complexity there at all. It's just follow orders, be a good soldier. We're done with the game. And it's just like,
Hmm.
but like with Fallout 3, like there was a lot more. There was much more dynamic. There was like infighting with the Brotherhood. There was, you know, who's which faction of the
Hmm.
Brotherhood represents them the most, and should you follow Alliance's, and this is if you actually play the game, should you follow Alliance's opinion of what the Brotherhood feels to be, which is more of an egalitarian force in the Wasteland, like the good military badasses as opposed to just military badasses who do their own thing. Like what, and it
Hmm.
Fallout 4 very lacked a lot in philosophy and ethics and questioning how you come about to your decisions, because in an RPG that's the whole point, and that's where I'm getting to bring ourselves back to the actual what we're talking about here. An RPG for me is one where there is a clear good side and bad side, but you have to entice me. There has to be something enticing about both of them that makes me want to play through both of them and have fun with them. So like in a game like Elder
Right.
Scrolls, the Empire and the Stormcloaks in Skyrim, they
Hmm.
both are actually objectively correct in a lot of ways. So in the Empire, like they're trying to keep the
Hmm.
Empire together from collapsing because that's exactly what the Ultimate Dominion wants, which is also the Stormcloaks hate the Ultimate
Okay.
Dominion too. So it's like a common foe that both of them have. It's just the Stormcloaks
Right.
don't want to be ruled by the Empire anymore because, correctly speaking, the Empire is just a puppet state to the Ultimate Dominion now, and the Empire knows that, and that's what they're trying to keep the Empire unified for. So when the next war breaks out between the two, because it inevitably will, they need to have as strong as a front as possible. But the debate, and it sort of even gets into this debate that even that's going on in America right now, it's just like, should the over encompassing federal system of an empire, or the US, for instance, be dictating what the local governments and local policies and local needs of the people are? Because that's what the Stormcloaks actually are. People like to call them racist and everything. It's like, no, they're just Nords. This
Hmm.
is how Nords have always been in all of the games. Okay? It's
Right.
just the imperial perspective of the Empire having to rule all the different races of Tamriel that makes the Stormcloaks seem like they're somehow worse than they already have always been, and people have loved the Nords for a long time. It's like this isn't anything new. This is just the Nords
Right.
being Nords, and the Nords actually in Skyrim are far more respectful of people than a lot of the other races. Like the Dark Elves enslaved people, flat out. Nords never did anything like that. They might have prejudice, but they didn't have like institutional horde things against other races. They just said if you're not a Nord, you're not as cool as us. That's basically the Nord
Yeah.
stance on a lot of things.
Mm.
And and
Yeah,
you
but they don't punish another one.
there's mistrust, so there's obviously conflict with that. So like a scene in Skyrim is when you first enter Windhelm, there's actually a Nord drunk tavern guy being flat out prejudiced against dark elves, saying that they're spies because they don't want to help them. And the dark elves just like, we don't want to help anybody. We're just trying to survive here, just like everybody else. And
Oh, I think I remember that.
yeah, so but that's what I'm saying. It's like a game needs to have complexity like that if you're going to be an RPG. And Skyrim, even though I think it's boring
Right.
today, when it first came out, it was enough to keep people entertained for a few playthroughs. We don't have that
Hmm.
today. And that's sort of where I want my perfect RPG to be, is that I want to have that sort of deep lore with that rich cultural
Hmm.
complexity that comes from a deep lore. So in the books that I'm writing right now, there's sort of like different eras that the books are going to be in. And one of the eras is part of the whole New World aspect. So we have themes of colonialism, with enlightenment, with religious revival, with just a lot of different aspects of the same thing going on, leading to the identities of the people in the colonies that you're going to be interacting with. So
Right.
there's a good RPG has to have layers of complexity that keeps us entertained, but also gives context to why characters do what they do. Fallout 4 is just, are you a raider or not, half the time. And I'm just like,
Hmm.
okay. I mean, I like the settlement system and I like killing raiders, but like that, I need more. And there's even people who are crafting mods right now to give that sort of more in the game. And I'm just like, you shouldn't be relying on
Hmm.
modders to do that. You should have that outright in the game when it first comes out on vanilla
Yeah.
content. Forget DLCs, on vanilla content. You should have enough to be able to replay the game 5 times and still be finding new and
Hmm.
interesting things in it. That's my perspective on a perfect RPG. And even then, like,
Or get different outcomes.
well, not even different outcomes, just new things all the time, new interactions, new things that
Okay.
you're finding into the world when
Mm,
you explore. That's the kind of
I got
complexity
you.
that you need from an RPG. And the thing is, and here's the thing, that's why I give Bethesda a little bit of slack with a lot of things, is because games like that do take a lot of time to do. All right, so us waiting over 10 years
Hmm.
now for Elder Scrolls 6 makes sense to me. But here's the thing, like the company's gotten bigger, they have more resources, they're making other games. You can devote more people to this so that we could have had a sequel by now. That's the caveat there. But to get back to what my main points are with my perfect game. So my perfect game is an RPG that has complexity with its story and its characters so that every single time you play through the game, you're finding your after 10 playthroughs should be enough to find out the majority of things in the game. All right? You have your basic plot line in
Hmm.
the first few playthroughs, and that's great. You can experience the main factions, but after that, people are going to be exploring more and more of the little things, and you still need to be focusing on those kinds of details. So, a game where you can go into a place multiple times and still haven't found everything out about it unless you've like legit spent hours in it, that's the kind of complexity I want
Hmm.
from an RPG. Because also in my perspective, an RPG is also where one where I can explore, gather resources. Because I loved the idea of Fallout 4 settlement building. My problem is that they did not do a good job with giving us content for that. So my perfect settlement building, and I even thought about this when thinking about Elder Scrolls 6, is that I don't want an abundance of settlements. I just want a good amount of settlements, like maybe 10 at the most, where I can build up solidly and then have quests with those settlements. And then have, again, it's this idea of complexity where each settlement has its own diverse leaders that you recruit and its own quest lines and its own problems that it faces, its own factions that it has to fight. You know, like if Fallout 4 had this idea of you're building settlements, well then why don't I have settlements with its own unique leaders that I get to interact with and decide whether they should stay in charge or not? Just that alone they didn't even think of for the settlements, and I'm just like, guys, come on. This is basic game
Right.
design here. So, and that's what I want is that I just want detail in an RPG. I care far more
Hmm.
about detail than I do graphics, even. Give me detail. I'm not here to ooh and ah over spectacle. I'm here to lose myself in a fictional world. That's the whole point. And then to get,
Yeah, and well, yeah, yeah, and that's the whole point. You play games like that. It's the whole point why I play simulators. Is you want to escape the reality, and you want to, you want to enjoy something else. You want to enjoy a fictitious world, but
Because
You
it's
almost
also
have
the
to be
same thing with
believable
like
too.
reading too. Like I'm reading through the Witcher series right now. It's just like you lose yourself in that stuff because it's just so.
How is it? Is it good?
Well, I'm on the first. Well, technically, it's not the first book released, but I'm on the first book in what's recommended reading material for it. So
Oh,
it's the short stories I think book on that. It's good. Like
oh,
don't get me wrong. Like the Witcher series is very. It's 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 it, it's unorthodox a little bit in how it is because it was written by a Polish guy. So the original language that it was written in and culture it was written in is Polish. So there's things about it that when you're
mm,
reading through it for the first time that you got to get used to. So like language is a little bit, you know, detailed in ways that Americans normally aren't detailed about. So
mm-hmm.
like if I was to describe something, I would use a lot of more adjectives than they would, but how he describes things is a lot more movement than you normally see in American literature, a lot more like visual movement or mental movement of characters' actions that we don't see a whole lot in
Mm-hmm.
normal writing. At least I don't see it in normal writing. I'm not of an avid reader. I'm trying to be, but like even off of what I used to read, like in just things like Harry Potter, things like Lord of the Rings, C.S. Lewis, all that kind of stuff. What we have in English literature is a lot less fluid than how this guy has written his book. So like when you're talking about The Witcher and how he fights the scene, he's talking about how he grabs his sword, how he moves on the field. Like there's a
Oh,
lot of like clockwise motion references to how he
yeah.
fights. So it's just like you in your head you're picturing the movement more than you are the details of the setting. So the author is focusing more on the the experience of fighting the monster rather than the details of the room that they're in. And that's sort of the difference I think between at least from what I've read so far between what we normally read as Americans and what this guy has written out. So if you sit down, you'll enjoy the book, but your imagination takes over the rest of the stuff when he's trying to just sell you the plot points and the action. But anyways, back
Mm.
to what we are talking
Yeah, I
about.
was just curious.
It's a good book. I recommend it. But so and so to end my first point, summarize my first point, which I've already done like 5 times. My perfect RPG, a third of it has to be details, it has to be complexity, it has to be interesting on multiple playthroughs. So my general requirement is like if I've on my 10th playthrough and I'm starting to feel like this is repetitive, okay, I'm going to say that's as far as it could probably be because there's only so much you can fit in a game anyway. But to my next point,
Right.
I love the idea, like what we went through with your racetrack. I love the idea of settlement building in an RPG because it really feels like it gives more
Mm-hmm.
purpose to the game as far as like end game content and mid game
Oh yeah, for
content.
sure.
So like if I was playing like a post-apocalyptic game or even a sci-fi game on another planet, I would want something that I refer to as a bunker system where
Mm-hmm.
you start a settlement, you start off with a small amount of resources, and you slowly build that up. You make it your home base for like a good portion of the game. And you recruit people coming in, but I want those people who are coming in. Yes, you can have your generic settlers or colonizers or whatever, but I want it to where when you're recruiting people, there's a narrative to that. There's somebody who comes in who you're going to make the leader, or multiple people who you're going to come in who you're going to choose to be the leader of that settlement, and they have their pros and cons to that. And so you have to decide which leader of this particular settlement is going to be good. And then you have to build up your settlement based upon the types of enemies that you run into that area of the map, which is also something that I don't think anyone has really dived into as far as like actual combat goes because like say in an RPG there's different sections of the map that deal with different characters. It's just part of the whole progression system. So the area that you're
Mm-hmm.
first spawning into, it only has basic damage conception. So your first settlement there is probably going to be your easiest settlement to build up. Because even if you had it to where you're being attacked in waves, any kind of damage is going to wipe those guys out. However, if you go into like say if we were on a post-apocalyptic planet and then you were fighting normal people, you set up a settlement on the other side of the planet that you're fighting monsters that only respond to a certain kind of weaponry, you're going to build your settlement up as a response to that more than you are to raiders or a faction that's coming through. So, and it's just part of that whole idea of like diversity in problems that you have to
Right.
solve. And
Right.
that's what I want from a settlement system. Obviously, give me, and this is the other thing about settlement systems, give me stuff to build with, you know? Don't give me just bare bones
Mm-hmm.
crap. Give me like I want 10 different building sets on vanilla content without unlocking anything. Give me that. All
Right.
right.
Variety.
Yeah, so and obviously that's more of an extreme way of saying that, but when I was playing through, one of my biggest frustrations with Fallout settlement system, and most settlement systems in other games too, like even like tower defense stuff, it's like you guys aren't giving me anything that makes this settlement stand out to all the others.
Mm-hmm.
Give me that. Or maybe each settlement has
Mm.
its own unique architecture that we have to build up. Sort of like what I was thinking in Elder Scrolls 6, like if you have different castles, each castle has its own aesthetic if you're going to have a settlement system. Each castle has its
Right.
own aesthetic, has its own art style, culture. It's people who are defending it change it as the settlement levels up. Because one thing that
Mm.
I remember when I played through Assassin's Creed 2, and you're building Monteriggioni. Obviously, I
Mm.
mispronounced that. But when you're building Ezio's actual original home base, each and every upgrade that you make, it changes the aesthetic of the whole town. So like when you're building
Oh.
it up at when you first get your home city,
Right.
it looks like a dump. But the more you've invested into the city, the more you clean up the buildings. Even the streets look like they're being cleaned up too. And then the banners of the whole town change. And then
Mm-hmm.
eventually, once you finish upgrading the entire town, the entire aesthetic looks different as well from that midpoint aesthetic because now everything's built up. You're now strong, and you start seeing the Assassin's Creed logo everywhere because the town is able to defend itself now and doesn't have to hide what it is.
Right. And that reminds me of Medieval Dynasty, where you have different, your choice of um kind of crafting and like different, you know, wood-based materials versus stone. You'll be screwed in the winter because your house isn't well insulated with stone. You have different. It's all choice-based stuff, but and then you have to grow your settlers and grow your NPCs and everybody and recruit people. But you have to make sure that houses are built before you actually um, have them come into the settlement. So same thing where it's just, you build up this,
But
you
that's
know.
still very basic stuff, though. I'm talking even more than that. I'm talking like give me quests with those
Oh, I
characters
I,
that are
I
coming
know.
in. So, because
Oh yeah, 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 yeah. And that's what you can do
it's
too.
all about making this interesting, worth the time to invest into your settlements. And that because that's my big thing in RPG.
Hmm.
Like if I'm playing a game where I'm leaving my imprint onto the world, supposedly, then I have to be able to do that in a way that makes it
Oh,
feel like it was really
still
all
there?
worth the process to this.
Is there?
What's up?
I'm here. You still there?
Yeah.
Okay. I don't know how I lost you. Keep on going.
Okay. Well, I was just basically saying that just you need to have diversity with your settlements on that stuff. Otherwise, people are just going to move on rather quickly from them. Because
Right, right. And yeah, and all I was saying is you can recruit the same. It's like the same thing in Medieval Dynasty. You can recruit them, but if you don't have any houses for
yeah,
them to actually stay in, they'll move on
yeah,
or grow a disinterested. But anyways, go ahead.
and that's I don't know. That's just mainly point two is that my perfect RPG has to have an in-depth settlement system that makes it worth fighting for. Because also on in-game
Mm-hmm.
content, like I want to be able to initiate conflict. Like I want there to still be like waves of attackers attacking us, even after the game
Mm-hmm.
ends, kind of stuff. Because then that's worth playing the game over and over and over again. And then at some point an RPG has to end. Like I understand that, but that doesn't mean that in-game content can't be fun. So, because even Bethesda sort of admitted this themselves when they came out with a Creation Club item that was just like, oh, here's a siren that allows raiders to attack you when you get up to this many levels of stuff. depending upon how many waves of attackers you can fight off. It's just like, that's what I want, but I want that done better, kind of deal. So,
Mm.
and then to my third point about my perfect RPG is that it the RPG mechanics have to be smooth. So everything from the crafting system to the dialogue to the combat, it has to make sense. It has to feel as natural as possible. And unfortunately, I just don't feel like a single RPG does that the right way enough. So let's take a minute and just think about this for a second. So I actually think Fallout's crafting system with the idea of like you go
Mm-hmm.
the UI pops up and then you pick out what you want to craft and then you do that. That's great. Wonderful. And I think the idea, oh, I get to go into a workbench and immediately can start crafting. Great. Wonderful. Other RPGs don't let you do that. And that's what was so frustrating is that Fallout had the actual ability to have seamless crafting throughout their entire settlement. Well, as seamless as they could at the time. But you have this idea of like very easy to craft things, but they didn't have any variety. Whereas other games have variety, but it's like, oh, I gotta pull up this circle, then I gotta go through this complex array of choosing options. Like, no, that's a waste of time. I want to get to building. And
Right.
so, but even still, that also translates to the idea of dialogue. Like, I don't want a dumbed down dialogue of four options. I want dialogue that actually makes sense to my character, that reflects the perks that I had, because that's the one thing about New Vegas that they was really well. The perks you had opened up new dialogue choices for you to use to resolve situations, which is wonderful. That's what you want in an RPG. And
Mm-hmm. Right.
obviously for me, as well as seamless combat, for me, I'm a very FPS person, so obviously first person shooters how I would prefer to deal with combat in a game. But even if you're designing a game that doesn't deal with first person shooter, if it's turn based or something, that stuff has to be seamless and integrated in a way that makes it feel like you're going from walking to combat to walking without any
Mm-hmm.
bugs into it. And I just don't know. I just maybe it's just because I've kind of been focusing on my own stuff for a while, so I haven't been playing RPGs. But I can't think
Mm-hmm.
of a single game recently that made me feel like that was done correctly. Like this was smooth. I went from
Right.
enjoying a walk to enjoying combat to enjoying walking to a merchant again. I just haven't experienced that any time recently. So, because even in games like Dragon Age, like that, there's so many hurdles that you have to go through just to sell your crap, you know? And I just feel like there's got to be a simpler way of doing this stuff to make the whole process of exploration, gathering, building, exploration, gathering, building repetitive and enjoyable at the same time. You got to have that. And I think one way
Right.
is to either, number one, expedite the process, but also to add variety to every encounter that you run into. So that when people play RPGs, there's going to be stuff that's repetitive overall. That's unavoidable. But if I can have 10 different encounters before I have the same encounter again, I'm not going to
Right.
notice that as often. So, and that's a lot of this is still just concept in my head. It's not as formulated as what we had with yours, but like that is my perfect RPG.
Mm-hmm.
Complex lore that's worth studying, that reflects in the society that we're dealing with, that reflects in the characters that we're dealing with, a settlement system that implements all that stuff that the complexity has, with variety of building the settlement and making it unique to how I want it. And then on top of that, with smooth mechanics that make sense, and obviously variety again, but also the ability to not be repetitive with anything as much as possible. That's my main point with an RPG. I don't like repetitiveness because it makes me feel like I'm doing the same thing again, and it turns me off to the game. And I mean, hopefully one day I can make a game like that. The books that I'm writing as sort of a prelude to the lore of those games.
Mm-hmm.
But it's just one of those things where it's like I'm not even sure I can even pull that off because what I'm asking is such an impossible thing, and I recognize that. But we're getting to the point now where like we need RPGs that actually keep people's attention and actually make them want to play the game because after like a year of playing an RPG, you're done, basically. The only thing that keeps me playing Fallout is modding. That's it.
Right.
All right, it's not the game itself anymore. So, and same thing with Dragon Age. Like I played that for 6 months, never touched it again. I'm thinking about streaming and going through it again, but it's just like
Mm-hmm.
I there's not enough in this to keep my attention, and
Mm.
it might be unrealistic to ask this, but there's just got to be an RPG somewhere that makes me feel like I can keep playing this after 5 years and still enjoy it. And I just don't think there's anything out there that's like that. And I want to have that. Even if I have to
Right.
build it myself, I want to have that.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Right.
but of course, here's the
It,
caveat. If you build it yourself, then you already know what's in it and there's no point in playing it.
yeah, that's the problem. See, I don't. Yeah, see, that's the hard part that I've had where it's like, yeah, you know what? I want to build this. I want to do that. I'm like, well, if I do that, then I know everything about the game that's gonna happen, and then it's not gonna be any fun because there's no unknown.
Yeah. And that's just the
So
caveat of being creators is that you want to create something that you know you'll enjoy, but you can't actually enjoy it after you're done creating it because you already know it. You've already done it.
yeah,
And
yeah, and I wonder if it would be different in a simulator based, because
no,
I wonder how. No, you don't.
I
Okay,
don't believe it
you
will
don't think
be.
so?
Not to burst that bubble prematurely, but like it's because
No,
you already
yeah,
know all the secrets to how the game's going to operate. You already know how big you can build it. You know that's sort of the reason why maybe Minecraft's the eternal game because there's always a new landscape that you spawn into and you can be like, "Oh, I could build that there. I could build that there." Even if it's the same template of buildings, you there's always a new way you can put it down. So if you can build a simulator that's like that, then maybe. Just like with an RPG, if I can build an RPG that has enough variety to where every time I spawn in, it feels like it's a new experience, then yes, we could
yeah,
enjoy our own
and
game. But
right,
I
and
don't know if that's possible. If we had
right,
infinite resources, we could do it. But in
yeah.
reality, I don't know if that's possible.
I
And that's why I like the idea of the settlement system, not to keep interrupting you, Eric, but
No, you're good. You're good.
that's why I like the idea of settlement systems because there's, especially in RPGs, because there's always something to be doing with those guys while you're doing the main quest. It's a good distraction, it's a good break between quest lines and that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But there's
Yeah.
not enough in-game content, and it's sort of like the idea of like when you grind, there has to be something you're grinding for at the end that makes you want to continue grinding, and there just isn't
Mm-hmm.
anything like that. All right, it's like
Mm-hmm.
it was the problem with Destiny. After some point, after grinding Destiny, you're done. There's no other point. What is there? Multiplayer? Well, that's not really going to be that great of a hook after a while. So, and that's why Destiny goes through its dry spells because once everyone's played the game for the first 10 hours, they're done. There's no point. They've grinded it out. They've gotten what they've wanted. There's nothing else keeping them. So, I don't know. Maybe it's just something about human nature that makes it impossible to make an RPG last.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I was just saying that the reason why Minecraft I think was so successful is because of that procedural type um innovation in that game. No one was it's really was never if it was attempted before, it wasn't attempted on that magnitude. And that's why I think it blew up so much, right away, like
well,
overnight. It just
I think it's not that people didn't attempt it, it's that the formula was right for that kind of game. So even now, like the problem with Minecraft still is the fact that it doesn't have variety. But even still, that doesn't mean
Mhm.
you can't enjoy a new experience when you go into the game. There's always new lands to discover. You can't have that in a stagnant world like RPGs have to make in order to function properly. And so where Minecraft has no story, it has adventure. And I think that's why it generally survives longer than RPGs, because even though RPGs have story in them, regardless of how you choose, the story ends. and that's the problem. Same thing with any successful franchise. At some point, the story has to end. Otherwise, you're not making it. Otherwise, you're tarnishing the legacy. Look at Star Wars. Like at some point, Star Wars has to end. Otherwise, they just keep making stuff that doesn't seem like it's good enough anymore. So,
Mm-hmm.
which is what we had in the trilogy, and that was the problem, is that you had Disney who bought it, trying to recreate the franchise. Like, no, you didn't need to recreate the franchise. You just needed to tell the next part of the story, which you didn't
Right.
do, because the next part of the story was the Thrawn trilogy from the books, but they didn't want to do that, even though they
Mm-hmm.
brought
Because it
Thrawn.
wouldn't. Yeah.
But it's just like they brought Thrawn back regardless. So just like, why didn't you guys just? Anyways, that's a whole different topic. But my main point is that at some point the story has to end, and that's maybe that's just a flaw that's unavoidable with RPGs.
Right. Yep.
I think a caveat to that though. So Dragon Age has this interesting thing called the keep. So it saves. You can actually decide or save your decisions from the previous game, and it'll transfer on into the next one. So that's actually a little loophole that I think you could do with RPGs. Like if I had the
Mm-hmm.
perfect game, I would have an RPG that maintains the world state as I left it from the previous game. So say if I was back on this post-apocalyptic planet in a sci-fi setting, all the decisions I made from that game and those characters transfer over into the sequel. However, time is in between that is irrelevant, but transfers over into the sequel. So like if there's like a historic spot where I built a settlement and let's say it's abandoned or something, it still technically has how I built it there. Now, if I could
Mm-hmm.
implement that with infinite resources, if I was able to implement that, that would be dope. That would be legit enough for me to replay multiple games over again. So I could have even that amount of variety in my games afterwards. So that is one caveat that we could get around the idea of RPGs ending. But it still runs into the same flaw. At some point, that game has to end too. So are you replaying the entire franchise, or are you just replaying that game? And that's I don't know. So,
Right.
but
Yep.
to sum up, that's my perfect game. Complexity and a worthwhile lore for an RPG that has variety with its gameplay, settlement building, and
Mm-hmm.
how to solve quests, and obviously a good amount of quests along with it, but also an RPG that makes me feel like it's natural to play. So it's seamless for me going from combat to selling stuff to crafting all in the same like 1 minute of moves. If you can get that
Right.
down, then that's the perfect RPG for me. And personally, FPS RPGs. So like, even if it's third person, like that's still better than a turn-based thing to me. I don't like turn-based RPGs. It doesn't work well with my brain. I don't think. It's not that I can't play it. It's just like it's not entertaining to me in that sort of genre. So, but that's my perfect game if I could have what I wanted.
Okay.
So,
That sounds good. It has a lot of different characteristics and something new, and that way each time you play it, it would be you wouldn't get the same thing every time. You would get a different outcomes, and where you'd be able to have more variety. So.
which is always good in an RPG.
Mm-hmm.
The only there's another concern that I'm thinking about now. It's just like we said earlier that too much choice is a problem in games too, because then you're indecisive. So,
Right. Right.
but I think with settlement building specifically, far more variety is needed than say quest line design. So I don't know. That's something that we'll have to balance out. But personally, I think variety, especially in gameplay, as far as how I can defeat an enemy, and especially in settlement building, is needed. We need far more variety and that kind of stuff with RPGs. Main stories, we can tweak that and work on it on another night. But that's my main problem with RPGs is that the mechanics don't give me the variety that I need to be entertained every time I play the game. So,
Gotcha. Well, that sounds good.
yeah, we had a productive conversation. So,
Yeah, got a lot done, and yeah, it was a it's a good conversation,
good
you
chat.
know, and
Good chat.
different
Yeah.
types of games, and yeah, it was a good variety, and yeah, it's just, I mean, there's a lot of games out there that you really like, and then you buy them, and it's like, yeah, I like it. Well, it would be better if maybe they did this and they did this, and but that is the downside to actually developing a game, is to know that
Sorry.
know the outcomes. But again, that is also a benefit as well, because that way, if there's something that you find in the game that it needs, well, it's easy to build it in point, because everything about that game, and like everything, so you'd be able to be easier to integrate it. So yeah, so I think that was a productive conversation with two different styles of games, but you and I are very similar in types of in terms of the building and the crafting side, and just wanting to have some sort of end goal, just some sort of management, and just where you want to build something, you have a goal in mind, and that's where I'm saying, where I'm not totally a big fan of like the big shooting games, is it's like I want to do something. I want to be able to build stuff, and to make some sort of settlements and establishments, and not just go and take people's heads off for the every mission, and just tell them, just show them like God and top of the world type rankings. So, but that's just me.
Yeah.
So, but
I
yeah,
think you
that was
summed it
good.
up right there, to be honest. So,
Yeah. So, yep. I think that wraps it up for this one.
hello, everybody, and thank you for watching our podcast. We do appreciate it. We will try to be uploading our podcast videos every Saturday. If you guys want to catch us when we do our podcast live, feel free to follow us on Twitch. The link will be in the description below, along with all of our other links to our personal channels. And in the meantime, I wish you all a wonderful, blessed rest of the night, and I will see you all again soon. Peace.